Right now, researchers at UT Health San Antonio are working to help those with schizophrenia. Eyewitness News reporter Jeremy Baker spoke to one of their researchers about a new grant that's helping them make progress.
About 1% of the population's affected by schizophrenia, and the drugs that we have to treat it just don't work very well.
That's why Dr. Jennifer Donegan, who sought after the Pathways to Independence grant, is working with rats to find better medications to treat the disease, eventually in humans.
They don't treat all the symptoms, and then they have some pretty nasty side effects, and a lot of people end up discontinuing their medications.
The research is targeting a part of the brain called the hippocampus. It's a curved structure that runs from the front to the back of the brain and what's lit up in red. It controls things like learning and memory, but also emotion and motivation.
The medications that are out there primarily target the dopamine system, but we think that the pathology is actually upstream of the dopamine system. In schizophrenia patients, we see that the hippocampus is hyperactive, so it's going in overdrive.
You're looking at a live animal recording where an electrode was lowered into the region of the brain that contains dopamine cells, and this is how they can see a dopamine cell that's firing.
The drugs that we use to treat schizophrenia have effects in rats and affect certain behaviors that are related to schizophrenic behaviors.
Behavior that can be crippling to someone suffering from the terrible illness.
It's hard to have a job, to maintain relationships when you can't think properly, maintain attention or focus.
At UT Health San Antonio, Jeremy Baker, KENS 5 Eyewitness News.